I know you all saw this yesterday. Sure that my sound is working here. Hold on. You know, I test this and it doesn't work. Very annoying. Oh, you can hear me. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Um so I know you all saw this yesterday. Wow. I'm just going to read out the tweet storm for my own edification because this moment was so epic that it almost justifies the entire 2020 campaign so far. I joked on Twitter that after reading this series of tweets, I needed a cigarette. Not to make any kind of dirty implication, obviously, but just to joke about how vindicating it was or validating. So here we go. Great! Exclamation point. Thank you, Hillary Clinton. You, the queen of warmongers, embodiment of corruption, and personification of the rot that has sickened the Democratic Party for so long, have finally come out from behind the curtain. From the day I announced my candidacy, there has been a concerted campaign to destroy my reputation. We wondered who was behind it and why. Now we know. It was always you through your proxies and powerful allies in the corporate media and war machine, afraid of the threat I pose. It's now clear that this primary is between you and me. Don't cowardly hide behind your proxies. Join the race directly. Okay, so let's break that down for a moment, shall we? The first tweet, or the first sentence, sort of sounds like an unusually vitriolic Glenn Greenwald tweet, which obviously is right up my alley. And it's notable that it took this long for somebody to say something that is totally truthful about Hillary Clinton. But even though her failures as a candidate are pretty well recognized at this point, it's still considered taboo to really lash into her in a direct and confrontational way like that, notwithstanding that it's totally well deserved. Now, Tulsi says, from the day I announced my candidacy, there has been a concerted campaign to destroy my reputation. That's literally true. Literally on the day that she announced formally her presidential campaign in February, NBC News timed a hit piece that still gets cited regularly to discredit Tulsi by this fellow named, let me just make sure I have his name, Ben Popkin, who thought it was very clever and journalistically legitimate to whip up a narrative about how Russia supported Tulsi or was backing her through this nebulous conglomeration of troll farms and websites, and suggest that she was backed by Russia. So that happened on the very day of her presidential campaign announcement speech in February. So she's literally conveying reality with that statement. It's not just hyperbole. Now, she goes on to say, we wondered who was behind it and why. Now we know it was always you through your proxies and powerful allies. Now, it's true that Tulsi resigned from the DNC in dramatic fashion in 2016, as everybody knows, and endorsed Bernie, and not just endorsed him, but became a surrogate for him. So actively worked on the campaign, and then went on actually to get the ceremonial role from the Bernie campaign of introducing his name into nomination at the 2016 convention, which is about the highest profile position you can get as a surrogate for a campaign. Now, is it true that Hillary is somehow masterminding or orchestrating the campaign against Tulsi? You'd be hard pressed to prove that directly. I doubt you'd find a transcript anywhere of Hillary issuing an order to some media or political ally of hers saying, do this or that with regard to Tulsi. But it's clear that the Clinton allied network that predominates the political media world still has been extremely opposed to Tulsi and has been very eager to pick up on the smears used against her. So in that kind of abstract way, it's true. And then Tulsi uses a little bit of hyperbole here, not just a little, frankly, a lot, when she says it's now clear that the primary is between you and me. Don't cowardly hide behind your proxies. Join the race directly. So the primary is not between Tulsi and Hillary, but in a literal sense, but in a more abstract sense, in terms of the forces that have been aligned against one another, I think it is fair to sort of at least stipulate as a rhetorical device that there is some kind of clash there between opposing factions in the party. One represented by Hillary, who is still tethered to this Cold War nonsense, wants everybody to view the 2020 election through the same blinkered conspiratorial prism as Hillary insists that the 2016 election ought to be viewed, which is that Hillary was deprived her rightful ascent to the presidency by this nefarious combination of Russian interference actors and, the media, who she still says was unfair to her, etc. And challenging Hillary to join the race is a little curious. I mean, that would be amazing if it actually happened, but still exceedingly unlikely, although the betting markets think that Hillary is a more likely nominee than about 16 of the people running. So it's not totally outside the realm of possibility, but the odds of that actually happening get slimmer and slimmer. But it's useful politically for Tulsi to sort of set herself up as the anti-Hillary option, and she's not just doing it on a whim. She's reacting to an incredibly vitriolic attack that was used against her by Hillary in this little podcast discussion that she had with one of her Democratic operative friends. So what has the reaction to this been? Have you heard many sitting Democrats come out and condemn this? I mean, this should be totally easy to condemn. It's among the most baseless smears that you could ever level. There's no evidentiary basis for it. And they're using all the kind of just gross innuendo that if a right-winger used it, they would be raising hell. But for the most part, you're not getting anybody really coming to Tulsi's defense who's a sitting Democrat. Now, Yang and Marianne Williamson did put out supportive tweets, but they're not sitting Democratic officials. It's positive that they said something favorable, but I'm talking about somebody who's been elected to office as a Democrat and or is running for president as a Democrat. So that would apply to Yang and Williamson. But you had like Cory Booker, for example. He just put out this cute GIF tweet where it's like Cory Booker looking all shocked, as if he's saying like, "Whoa, what is that?" So that's a way to like hide behind a stupid meme rather than make any real definitive statement about the propriety of the attack that was leveled. Even Ilhan Omar put out a similar GIF where all she does is quote tweet Tulsi and put in this GIF about whoa, like with a person looking stunned, which is ironic because Tulsi actually defended Ilhan Omar when she was under attack by Democrats and the media on totally spurious grounds regarding her statements on Israel. And we don't have anything from Bernie yet. Curious to see if he will address it. He would probably be asked about it in a media interview were he to do one. I have a feeling that Bernie would be diplomatic and come to Tulsi's defense in some sense, probably not as forcefully as some would like in terms of he's not going to, ferociously denounce Hillary Clinton in all likelihood. But I have a feeling that were he to address it, he would defend Tulsi in some form. Maybe he'll raise it at this rally today for his comeback after the heart attack in Queens, but I doubt it. You have all these Democratic partisans in the media now expressing their anger that Tulsi was ever even allowed in the debate stage in the first place, given how mean she was to Hillary. So here's a funny tweet from Walter Shapiro, who is just this totally dull and vapid longtime political commentator and journalist. Memo to Tom Perez. Don't you feel proud that you made room on the debate stage for Tulsi Gabbard, who just called the 2016 nominee the queen of warmongers embodiment of corruption? But your rigid cockamamie debate rules exiled Steve Bullock and Michael Bennet. Great going. Now, I agree that the debate rules are rigid and cockamamie, but the problem with the debate rules is not that they momentarily gave a platform to somebody who then went on to speak truthfully about Hillary Clinton. So if that's your problem with the debate rules, you're just showing how inane you are. And by the way, I do think it is a little unfair that somebody like Steve Bullock and even Michael Bennet have been excluded. But if you're going to use Tulsi's inclusion to whine about why those two were excluded, you may be a Democratic partisan who's probably never had much in the way of an original thought. Nina Turner, who's the co-chair of the Bernie campaign, did put out a tweet this morning just making sort of a generic statement of friendship with Tulsi, although she didn't address the substance of it head on. So that's one thing. And now there's a big debate around why Hillary even did this in the first place. I mean, if you want to disempower a candidate who you view as a threat or who you think could create some kind of liabilities in the future for your party, if that's your thinking, if you're Hillary, why would you then elevate that candidate to an enormous degree by launching this completely groundless attack that was obviously going to get picked up on by the media and breathe even new life into Tulsi by boosting her? She was maybe the biggest story yesterday politically, and at least online, which it's that's its own little world. So maybe it's not the biggest story overall, but nonetheless, you're really giving a major attentional boost to Tulsi, which is probably the last thing you'd want to do if you were sincerely concerned that she was some kind of Russian plant and was trying to wage some kind of surreptitious campaign to divide the Democratic Party and wreak havoc. So it's not even clear what Hillary's calculus there even was. it just seems like she's off the reservation. But around this now, there's like a lot of discussion about Tulsi as a figure, what her political station is within the Democratic Party and the media and the ideological landscape overall, and everybody kind of points to how she has these online right wing supporters, like as if that's the main facet of her entire political agenda and presentation. Now, is it true that there are people online who are libertarians, conservatives, right wingers, etc., who often express favorable attitudes towards Tulsi? Yes, that is true. But the lion's share of her support, and I can attest to this not just by looking at who supports her online, but by actually going to her events, looking at her donor numbers, etc., speaking to her staff, those people are overwhelmingly Democrats or Democrat-leaning independents. So for every single profile of her, for all media commentary about her to focus on like 3 or 4 prominent right-wing personalities who have said nice things about her is absurd. It shows you what their agenda is. It shows you that they want to discredit her by selectively highlighting a few figures that are deemed to be unconscionable and making that be representative of her entire support base, which is just not true. And furthermore, if she does have support from a certain segment of right wingers, even if it's not the majority, which it's not, but it does exist, why is that considered so bad? In the past, if you're able to expand the number of people who may consider voting in a Democratic primary, or if they are being compelled to support a Democratic candidate, even if they might have disagreements with many of their policy positions. So if you can get a libertarian to support a candidate who, for example, wants to institute a universal government healthcare program that everybody's automatically enrolled in, which Tulsi supports, then isn't that something that would ordinarily get applauded, right? If you can get a right winger to say, you know what, when I hear Tulsi explain why Medicare for all or a variant of Medicare for all is sound policy, you know what, I maybe don't agree with that on every level, but I have some degree of trust in her ability to communicate that idea, and therefore I'll support her. And you can go even to other domestic issues like Tulsi introducing a bill that was sort of the precursor to the Green New Deal with more specifics. That's why she wasn't like a Green New Deal person, because she had already introduced a bill that essentially had that accomplished what the Green New Deal purported to want to accomplish, which was basically prohibiting fossil fuel use after a certain period of time. So if you can get a right winger to back that, something like that would ordinarily get portrayed as like a marker of pride. But in Bernie's case, or in Hillary's case, sorry, in Tulsi's case, it's portrayed as a marker of shame. And people are saying Tulsi no longer supports Medicare for all. That's not true. I know a lot of people said that and made that allegation based on one interview that she did on NPR, where, in fairness, she didn't explain it very well, or she didn't characterize it very well. But if you look at her subsequent statements where she talks about healthcare, she makes it clear that she's not in favor of a public option. She simply wanted to come up with her own framing of Medicare for all, given that everybody seems to support Medicare for all in theory, but then has their own position. So she still supports everybody being automatically enrolled in a universal healthcare program, which is the essence of Medicare for all. But she does also emphasize that you should still be permitted to purchase supplementary or cosmetic private insurance. And that's not at all out of sync with the way that universal healthcare programs all over the world work, including the UK, which has a national health service, yet also has a private insurance industry that people can buy into if they have the means. So that's essentially what she attempted to convey with that one interview on NPR, which again I think she sort of fumbled in a way. But if you look at the totality of everything that she said about Medicare for all, including statements at campaign events, etc., subsequent to that, then the position is consistent. So what's the playbook when Tulsi gets into the news? It's to, again, highlight and elevate all these right-wing figures to suggest that she's just this Trojan horse for racist conservatives or whatever to infiltrate the Democratic Party. So what do is they resurrect David Duke, of course, who is one of the most overhyped trolls in American political history. He has not been relevant in an electoral sense since the early 90s. And yet he gets trotted out every time the media wants to delegitimize somebody who strays from bipartisan consensus in the foreign policy arena, because David Duke, usually has a confrontational, anti-establishmentarian take on foreign policy that stems from his basic anti-Semitic, anti-black, etc. viewpoint. So if you happen to oppose the Iraq War in 2003, then you could get accused of joining hands with David Duke because he also opposed the Iraq War. And obviously that guilt by association tactic is ridiculous, but people use it selectively whenever they want a convenient cudgel to wield against somebody who departs from consensus in a way that they find threatening. The same was actually done with respect to Ilhan Omar earlier this year when she correctly criticized the influence of the Israeli lobby on American politics and was attacked mercilessly for that. And David Duke came out and endorsed Ilhan Omar. Right? So did anybody think that David Duke endorsing Ilhan Omar was actually legitimate? Did anybody think that just because he happens to coincide with her on a narrow point involving Israel meant that he was offering a full-scale endorsement of Ilhan Omar? Of course not. Anybody with a brain should be able to see through that guilt by association tactic. But of course, at the time, anybody who was mad at Ilhan Omar for speaking truthfully about the Israel lobby said, "Oh, look at you. You are now allies with David Duke," which is beyond preposterous. And so they do that same sort of thing every time. And they're doing it again now, even though David Duke really hasn't done anything of note with regard to Tulsi recently. I mean, you shouldn't even be paying attention to him in the first place because he's a troll. He uses his name recognition to maximize his visibility by duping gullible journalists and political figures into giving him attention, which he gets by just latching on to whatever is relevant. And that's what they're doing with regard to Tulsi at the moment, because she committed the moral sin of accurately depicting Hillary Clinton's nefarious influence on the Democratic Party and the political landscape writ large. Now, another thing you hear is that, oh, look at you. I mean, you are rebutting allegations that you're a Russian plant or that your campaign is being orchestrated surreptitiously by Russia by repeating Russian talking points. So the idea is that in order to combat the accusation that you're somehow an asset of Russia, you're actually doing the opposite of what you intend to do by validating that allegation, in that you are repeating Russian talking points. That's what you hear often stated with respect to Tulsi, but also Jill Stein, others in the media, including me. I often get this accusation that I'm repeating or using Russian talking points. And what does that mean? What's a Russian talking point? Well, as recently they are saying that if you express a certain viewpoint with regard to Syria, given that's been in the news recently, you are using Russian talking points. So if you say that maybe it wasn't so world historically horrible that the U.S. troops withdrew from northeastern Syria because they were never legally entitled to be there in the first place, and it was always a totally untenable situation for them to be mediating between rival geopolitical forces. The U.S. never accomplishes that mediating role in a positive way for the long term. But if you support that, then you're using Russian talking points, because what happened, Russia was able to, for example, take command of a U.S. military installation in the area, and it advances Putin's interest for the U.S. to have less of a prominent role in Syria. So that's a Russian talking point in their minds. But it's broader than that. I mean, if you do anything which could be described as like fomenting dissension in the United States or creating division, that's chalked up as a Russian talking point, because the cliched, lazy interpretation of what Russia's great ambitions are is to, disrupt American democratic practice by pitting people against one another. So if you say anything that could be characterized as too divisive, forget foreign policy. Then that often gets twisted into this idea that it's a Russian talking point. So if somebody accuses you of repeating Russian talking points, or if they say that what you're advocating just so happens to be aligned with Russia, you can pretty much just conclude that they've never had an original thought in their lives, because what's embedded in the assumptions behind that accusation? That anybody who has any kind of political views, anybody who formulates political thought, can't have done so as a product of their own individual reasoning, but must have done so because they're simply reciting talking points. Somebody who makes that accusation is probably themselves reciting talking points, most likely from MSNBC or whatever idiot national security analyst that cable news has elevated and whose tweets they consume or what have you. There's another irony here, because Tulsi once again repeated yesterday that she's not going to run as a third-party candidate. She's been clear and consistent about this. So what are these people so paranoid about? Do they think she's just straight up lying? I haven't known Tulsi to straight up lie. I guess it's plausible that at some point she could change her mind and decide to run as a third-party candidate, but that would be a major about face, and it's not at all likely that she'll do that. But Hillary and her little band of acolytes whip up these imaginary scenarios in order so that they can lash out against anybody who they feel is threatening in whatever way. Like, Hillary just got her information, it seems, from reading a handful of NBC and New York Times articles about Tulsi. She didn't do any individual research. It's not like she got any special information that shed light on Tulsi's motives. Tulsi's motives have been pretty out in the open. She's not planning on running as a third-party candidate. Now, She does say that she will continue her campaign through to the convention, which, in the minds of many Hillary's partisans and Democratic, you know, water carriers, that could be just as egregious in their minds, because if you continue your campaign all through the convention, you could be seen as fomenting dissension within the party because you're campaigning for too long at a time when Democrats are supposed to all unite. So that could be just as bad in their minds as a third party run. So who are the big people in the media who are backing up Hillary's assertion? Surprisingly, Hillary actually did get a lot of pushback, at least online. I haven't followed much in TV except the clips that pop up, but there has been some consternation that Hillary would go down this road. Somebody asked, why has there been zero coverage by TYT on this? I don't know. I don't watch TYT. Here's what one of the most prominent security state officials who has now infiltrated the popular media had to say. Asha Rangappa, who's a former FBI special agent and now is seen as this vaunted authority on all things national security. She says, this is so important. Russian assets are not formal relationships in the USIC sense of the word. If you are parroting Russian talking points and furthering their interests, you're a source who is too dumb to know you're being played to ask for money. Okay, so she's trying to justify Hillary's claim in that she's saying that Hillary wasn't literally alleging a direct relationship between Tulsi and Russians, but she didn't just say that Tulsi is a Russian asset. She said that Tulsi was being groomed by Russians. And if you're being groomed, that does imply a direct relationship, meaning that agents of Russia are somehow guiding your campaign or shaping your priorities or directing you. So the grooming thing does imply something that's more active than what asset tends to imply, although the term asset is ridiculous regardless. Why come up with the term Russian asset if you're not intending to insinuate some kind of illicit coordination? It doesn't make any sense. You also had, predictably, some people in the Kamala Harris world come out and back up Hillary. Mina Harris, who is a niece of Kamala, obviously, and a Uber executive, quote tweeted one of the tweets in Tulsi's thread and just said, Russia be gaslighting. Russia be gaslighting, like she's trying to give some kind of slang interpretation to that. It's just like, why can't these people actually communicate anything without resorting to ridiculous internet cliches that make no sense given the context? Evan McMullin said, I believe it's true. This is the guy who was the Never Trump hero in 2016 and ran as a third-party candidate and actually did reasonably well in, for example, Utah, but obviously not well enough to deprive Trump of winning the state outright. Evan McMullin says, I believe it's true. Tulsi Gabbard is with the Russians, and the Russians are with Tulsi Gabbard. She confirms it every time she opens her mouth. I mean, give me a freaking break. And the reason why, okay, somebody just gave a super chat, so I'll read it. The blunt truth at the right time. All is forgiven, Congresswoman, regarding your eventual endorsement of the DNC improved nominee. You are my hero once again, and you're all right too, Michael. Thank you. That's the thing. Tulsi almost certainly will eventually endorse the Democratic nominee. I know people who support her now are probably not going to like that very much, depending on who it is. But she will pretty much all but certainly endorse a Democratic nominee. It'll take a while, but she is a Democrat. I'm sorry. That's just who she is. And if you don't like that, well, what can I say? The other thing about this attack from Hillary is that Hillary has sycophants and sleazy operatives who have been aligned with her or her husband for decades throughout their many presidential campaigns and tenures in government. They're all throughout the media and political world. They're like a plague, and they're maybe a little bit less visible now that she has sort of fallen out of favor to some extent, but they're still there. And so when Hillary goes after this relatively minor candidate, at least in terms of a network and a following, she knows that it's not going to be a fair fight. Like, she knows that that Hillary is automatically going to activate her nationwide sleazy network of defenders in order to rush into the fray. Whereas Tulsi doesn't have anything like that. So Hillary knew that it was not going to be a fair fight, and she did it anyway, which is really the hallmark of a bully. But it elevated Tulsi to a major extent. So I don't know what Hillary's intention was, but who can say anymore with her? Here's Susan Hennessy, the lawfare head honcho, who is a former National Security Agency lawyer and is now, again, one of the security state officials who is imbued with unearned authority to opine on all things national security from her perch on CNN or wherever else. Susan Hennessy begins her tweet, "Gabbard is vile. In some ways, the best strategy is to ignore her. But 2016 election was a multi-pronged attack that involved not just attacking Clinton, but bolstering candidates like Stein, who undeniably played spoiler role. We ignore possibility of that repeating itself at our peril." So that's Susan Hennessy being pretty clear about where she stands. She is in favor of maybe not the specifics of Hillary's direct attack on Tulsi, but she's in favor of marginalizing anybody who seems like a spoiler, meaning everybody who's outside the bounds of ordinary partisan bickering and expands the range of political debate. That is unacceptably vile in Susan Hennessy's mind. When Tulsi responded to Hillary in the way that she did, there were all kinds of surprised reactions, as if Tulsi had this sinister, mysterious motive for responding in that way. Like, if you read the recent profiles of Tulsi, there's always this theme of, what is she really up to? What is actually motivating her? Like, is this deep and inscrutable mystery? Well, what the hell is she supposed to do when the former nominee of the party and Secretary of State and one of the most prominent political figures in the entire country comes out and accuses her of being an agent of Russia? Like, should she just ignore it? So should she just laugh it off? No, of course you have to respond. And if you're in her position, it makes total sense as well to capitalize on it politically to the extent possible. And that's what she did. There's no mystery there. It's just common sense. Here's another thing. So hopefully, if anybody follows up with Hillary on this, I don't know where she's hiding, but if anybody is able to follow up with Hillary on these deranged comments, they should make her stand by the implications of her rhetoric, which is that if Tulsi is truly being controlled by Russia, as Hillary alleges, that's a national security threat. You know why? Not only is Tulsi a member of Congress, she's active military. So if you have a major in the National Guard who is being surreptitiously controlled by Russia to advance their ambitions, that would be a national security threat. So is Hillary calling for an investigation, maybe a special counsel investigation, into the influence of Russia in the military? I'd like to know. Somebody says she's not active military, she's National Guard. Okay, but she's active military and that she can be called up at any time. And she just served on a military mission in August. So whether you use the word active military, she's okay, she's National Guard, whatever. So if the National Guard is compromised now by a Russian agent, maybe Hillary should lead that investigation to ferret all that out. That's the question I would pose to Hillary if she were in front of me, which she, of course, never will be. The one time I did actually ask Hillary a question, I was face to face with her. Like literally, it was on a rope line after a rally. And she obviously heard me. She was like, we were like this far apart. And I asked her about Yemen because Yemen had been completely ignored throughout the 2016 campaign, despite the humanitarian crisis. And I said it very loud and very directly right into her face. And she just was like this, continuing to shake hands with people on the rope line. And she just totally ignored me as if she didn't hear me when she so obviously did. David Frum, who can always be relied on for among the most idiotic takes, said yesterday, clearly Tulsi made a big mistake not running in the Republican primary where her fan base is. I am so sick of that accusation because it's a total confabulated product of media narratives. The majority of her supporters are not Republicans. I'm sorry if that offends you, but it's true. You could have supporters. Obviously, her supporters are going to be skeptical of the DNC. They're going to be skeptical of Hillary. They're going to be skeptical of Democratic leadership, given their complicity in foreign policy failures. But it doesn't make them Republicans. I would challenge Frum and any of these other people to actually go to a Tulsi event or talk to Tulsi supporters and then find out if they're Republicans, because they're generally not, notwithstanding a sprinkling of libertarians and right-wingers who do support her but are not anywhere near the majority. So David Frum, who I've actually debated before in person, and I challenged him again, and he was actually going to, he told me once that he told me a couple months ago that he was working on a hit piece about me, but it never came out. So I don't know what is up with that. Okay, people, that's it for now. I think I'm going to go to the Hillary comeback rally in Queens just to observe and maybe talk to some people about what they think about this latest episode. If you happen to be there, if you're going, look out for me. And yeah, I will talk to you later. Have a wonderful day.